Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with me on yet another episode. And I just want to remind you that this is our last episode before our hiatus. And our goal is to come back in 2025. But right now, we're working on some big projects that require a lot of our time. So that's what we're focusing on right now. In the meantime, I am excited to be joined by Torey Kehoe. She is a certified fertility awareness and sexual health educator and the founder of Honeypot Health. Torey is here to dive into a conversation that I think so many of you will relate to: the fear, shame, and anxiety around unintended pregnancy. If you've ever felt terrified that you might get pregnant unexpectedly, or if you've struggled to trust your body when it comes to fertility, this episode is for you. Torey has a deeply personal story to share about her own experience with an unintended pregnancy in college and how that led to years of anxiety and fear around her sexual and reproductive health. But her journey didn't end there. Torey discovered the Fertility Awareness Method at age 29, and it completely changed her relationship with her body. In this episode, she also talks about how FAM empowered her to heal from her past experience and overcome the monthly anxiety that many of us feel around pregnancy. We'll also discuss how Torey is now helping her clients overcome their fears of using FAM for birth control, how understanding our cycles can give us back control over every aspect of our fertility, and why this conversation is so important to break down the stigma around natural fertility methods. I can't wait for you to hear Torey's incredible insights into overcoming pregnancy anxiety and reclaiming body autonomy. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to hearing your feedback on this episode. Hi, Torey. Thank you so much for being here with me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here.
I am honored. I am really, really thrilled to be talking about this topic because I feel like it's one that's probably near and dear to a lot of women's hearts. And so I'm happy that this was your proposed topic. And so, with that said, I figured we would start by exploring this deeply rooted message that we often receive growing up about pregnancy and fertility. And as I was thinking about it, actually, I feel like many of us grow up with this looming sense of anxiety around our reproductive health. So maybe you can speak about that. Like, how do sex education, or, well, lack of it, the media, and even our family conversations perpetuate the fear and misinformation about an unintended pregnancy?
Mm. Yeah, it's so pervasive. It's, as you said, it's in our media, it's in our sex education. It can be something that is mentioned at home. So I think for me, I remember when I got my first period, it was all about like, you can have a baby now. And a lot of those messages, and I'm 14, and sometimes, girls are even younger than that, and you're not even really conceptualizing that. And it's just such a weird thing to think about at that age for a lot of young people that, okay, period equals I can get pregnant. And so it already has a little bit of fear there because you're like, oh gosh, like what do I do with that information? It just doesn't compute with kind of where you're at developmentally.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
And
As
yeah,
you say
it's
that,
true.
yeah, I'm thinking about that, especially because so many girls are getting them younger and younger too.
Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, there's the myth that many of us, including myself, got in sex education that you can get pregnant every day of your cycle. And I'm sure you've talked about this a lot on your podcast, that that's not the case, and that we have a certain amount of fertile days in our cycle that we can track and know when those are. But since we're not taught that, we just think, okay, anytime that I have unprotected intercourse during my cycle, I have the chance of getting pregnant. And so there's just this underlying sense that that it happens randomly and we don't really understand it. And so I think that builds a lot of the anxiety as well, is just not really understanding what's going on with our bodies and how it actually works. Yeah.
Yes, I cannot agree more. Oh, carry on.
I was just going to say one other kind of, it's not really a myth, but it's sort of a story that we're told in our culture as well, is that unintended pregnancy is this terrible thing, this life ruining thing, that it's very shameful, that you've done something wrong, that you're careless. There's, people might call you a slut or things like that, was definitely messages that I got. And so to me, it was like, that is the worst thing that could ever happen to you. And so having that anxiety around that as well, I think that could be a thing that many other women might have experienced.
Yeah, I think that this is really on point. And I think back to my quote unquote sex education. I went to a Catholic high school. I grew up in another country. So there just really weren't any of these resources at all. I feel like for even though the US system around sex education is not good by any means. I felt like my friend's hair got more of an education than I did, but my education was called Christian Family Life Education. So you can imagine what that was like. And and it was taught by a woman who I think she admitted to us that she'd been in a relationship once in her whole life. And so she really didn't have any experience, but I remember at some point, this wasn't in my class, it was the other class, but they were also getting this education too, and they were shown videos of, I think, like an abortion procedure to scare them out of ever having sex,
Right.
unmarried sex. And so these kinds of things, now that I think back to it, are so dysfunctional. Like they just create, like you said, in these years where we're really just like sponges trying to figure out our place in the world and take in all this information, we're being so shamed by these bodily processes that are like raging, right? Our libidos are
Yeah.
kind of crazy as teenagers, like hormones are going crazy. We're lost and confused, just trying to figure things out. So can you talk a little bit about that too? Because I feel like this just creates this crazy fear-based attitude around pregnancy and trusting our own bodies that just leads us to feel like this is so out of our control.
Absolutely. Well, I relate to your story about sex education because mine was similar. I live in Toronto now, but I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, so it was very conservative and like had religious undertones even though it was a public school. That was
Right.
very much a part of our education there. And so it was abstinence only, no sex before marriage. And then I'm pretty sure they said, and if you do, use a condom, but they never showed us how to use it or any demonstration or anything like that. So I know for myself, I came out of that very unaware and uninformed of my body. And for me personally, that led to just going out into the world. And yeah, second year of college, I did experience an unintended pregnancy because I wasn't on birth control at the time. And I just was very unaware of how my cycle worked or anything like that. So yeah, it was a really challenging time and a time where I really felt like I had to handle everything on my own because I had so much shame about it and that I couldn't ask for help. And that's something that I wish I could go back and tell my younger self, like, it's okay and it's not the end of the world and you can ask for help. So,
Yes.
yeah, just relating to everything you say. And unfortunately, I keep hearing from even the younger generation that it's not better now.
Hmm.
Um,
What
I
do
was
you
talking to
think?
someone who's
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say I was talking to somebody who was in their 20s as well, and I thought, "Oh, sex ed's getting better, right?" And she said, "No, it's we still aren't taught a lot about our bodies, and there's still a lot of these messages." So,
I
yeah.
would agree with that. I just had a conversation with a really good friend of mine who has, I think, 14-year-old twins. And over the last couple of years, they've been having these kinds of classes in school. And it's in Michigan, like a nice area, and they have well-funded schools. And even with good funding, they're still not getting adequate or accurate information. The education is just basically very old school, very antiquated. So it's not at all accurate, and there is still a degree of shame sort of wrapped up in
Yeah.
the classes that they're taking or have taken. So yeah, and then talk to me a little bit about the family side of things because I do want to hear more about your story. But I'm thinking about the family component because that's a piece I think that is often missing in these conversations. What are parents doing? How are they talking to their kids? Is this not even happening? Because I know back then when we were younger, I mean, my mom was probably pretty mortified. I remember she gave me a book and I learned a whole bunch of stuff in that book. And I had so many questions, but I didn't really feel totally comfortable asking her those questions. Our poor
Yeah.
parents, I know they were just doing what they were just doing what they could. And also just taking into account their experience, or at least our mother's experiences with their mothers. And that there was no conversation at all, and in most cases, a vast majority of cases. So we've come a long way. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. But I do think it's a conversation that's worth having, like, if for parents nowadays, figuring out how to have those conversations with your young people and like starting early with age appropriate stuff and building as you go. I think it's such a powerful way to build on what might be being received in sex ed because it's only going to be so much. And depending where you live, it's different in every state or country. And so, yeah, I think it does. It shouldn't only come down to the parents, but it kind of takes a village. And there's people that run period positivity workshops, and I just got certified as a period positivity facilitator. So I can't wait to bring that into my community as well to just help spark those conversations amongst young people and their caregivers. So there's lots of resources out there now, and I think it's a different world with Instagram and social media and everything like that. But yeah, back then it was just different and more kept behind closed doors, I think.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that that has changed quite dramatically, at least in my experience with my friends who have very open conversations about their moon time and their periods and their cycles
Yeah.
in general with their daughters particularly. Most of my friends do have little girls, and so the conversations are just so cute and funny, and these kids obviously have none of the baggage that any of us have, so they're just an open book and they're like, "Oh, okay, mom has her period again. That's cool, no big deal."
Yeah.
And
It's so
especially when
different
they're so
now. Yeah.
little. It's so different now. And I just love to see it. So I feel like we're
Yeah.
moving in the right direction. And then you mentioned social media, which of course has its good and its bad. And I think
Yes.
that there's so much there. I can't tell you how many 12, 13, 14 year olds have emailed me over the years just saying, I took your period quiz, or, I'm really struggling with this and I don't know what to do. And so I feel like there's so much more knowledge, and I feel like they are just way more clued in than I ever was. It would never have occurred to me to reach out to someone
No.
at that age, and they're just
Yeah.
emailing me like no big deal, or asking me
Yeah.
messages, sending me messages on Instagram. So I feel like we're getting there, but it is a slow roll.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
you have to take everything you see on social media with a grain of salt because you don't really know who's talking always, but it's tough for
yes.
the younger people to make those decisions. But hopefully their algorithm is showing them the good stuff.
Yeah, that's very true. That's a good point. I know. I would like to circle back to what you were saying about your experiences of having an unintended pregnancy when you were in college, and just maybe talk a little bit about how that affected you, your relationship with your body, how it influenced your outlook on your fertility, your reproductive health, just on sex in general, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for asking. Well, as I said, it happened in college, and I yeah, I think I just felt so much shame around it, and I had a lot of fear and anxiety for the unknown and just didn't know who to talk to about it. So it was really hard for me because I felt like I went through a lot of it alone, and that was mainly due to this shame that I was feeling.
Mm.
And then moving forward, so that happened in my early 20s. I went on birth control because I thought that was the responsible thing to do after such a thing to happen. And it ended up making me really sick. And so that didn't really work out for me either. But even when I was on birth control, it was just this constant anxiety that anytime I had intercourse, I was going to get pregnant. I had this fear, and it just made every end of the month terrifying because I'm just like, when's my period coming? When's my period coming? Like hoping and praying for it every time. And then yeah, when I look back on it, I think that it also made that intimacy that I was trying to explore and partnerships, it made it less enjoyable and less pleasurable because I had this in the back of my head, this anxiety and this fear around an unintended pregnancy and kind of correlating the two things as one for a long time. So yeah, it was
Mm.
tough. My 20s, that was my 20s, was what I like to call pre-anxiety, like pregnancy anxiety, because I felt I had it every month, basically, that I had sex. So it was a lot. Yeah.
That is a lot. But you are far from alone. When I think about the anxiety
Yeah.
over getting pregnant, I just, I mean, I can't even describe it. It's just, I think that it is. the story of pretty much everyone's life who doesn't have the education that we have now, and or the understanding of our bodies that we are so lucky to have now. And even I still, you know this, you still meet women who are in their 30s, early 40s, who still have no idea about
Yeah.
any of this stuff. And so living with this level of anxiety, and I think it speaks to bigger issues in our society as well, around the woman feeling responsible solely for
Mm,
pregnancy, whether that's pregnancy prevention, or just actually if they were to get pregnant, what would happen. So I think that
mm.
there's so much to say about that too. I don't know if you want to add to any of that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's one of, my points that I like to bring up with clients when I'm kind of trying to help them work through some of the anxiety that they might be having about choosing a natural birth control, going off the pill, and really relying on their cycle tracking to know when they're fertile and infertile. Is the communication with the partner, I think, can have a huge impact on quelling those anxieties. Because when you know you're in that trusting partnership and you've made the decision together of how you would handle an unintended pregnancy, I think that can quell a lot of the anxiety, because it's like, we got each other, we're going to be there for each other, it's not all on you, and this is what we're going to do. So having some of those, it can be challenging conversations with partners, I think, is a huge part of also helping to relieve some of those anxieties that people might be feeling.
Oh, yes, exactly. Like, oh, I'm not in this alone. Okay, great. And I think that that's a
Yeah.
common issue that women experience. One of the things that you had mentioned is sort of like this uh, anxiety around getting pregnant that makes you feel like sex is less enjoyable or less pleasurable. Um,
Yeah.
can you speak to that? Because I think that's also a huge issue that we contend with
Well,
when we
yeah.
don't know what's going on with our bodies.
Yeah, well, I think so much of sex and connection is actually in the head, in the brain for women, especially. We relate and connect, and we feel more relaxed. Or, sorry, we feel more connected when we're relaxed and we don't have anxiety. At least that's a lot of our experience. And so when there is these anxieties, even if they're just kind of under level, like just there, it can affect how you feel about yourself, how you feel about your body, and just prevent you from getting fully into the moment and connecting with a partner. So I think it can have a huge underlying impact on feeling pleasure and connection. And then, of course, the education is completely lacking as well around women's pleasure and all the different pleasure centers, how it all works, how to communicate about pleasure. So there's a lot there as well to untangle a lot of times.
Yeah. I'm just thinking in my own experience. I mean, like, and just in talking to clients as well, uh, there's a lot obviously involved in sex for women. And I feel like we're always sort of in our heads. A lot of us are, overthinking
Yeah.
things. And so to add on that anxiety about, whether you might get pregnant this time, because you don't have that sort of deeper rooted understanding of how ovulation works and how our fertility works. It just it must like really suck the pleasure out of it in so many instances, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And I think also, just like I said, not being educated or well informed about my body at the time, and not really knowing how to advocate for my needs in those situations, because I just was so young and didn't have a lot of the tools that I have now. So it's twofold. It was the anxiety, and then the lack of kind of education about my body and pleasure contributed to that. But yeah, the anxiety was real, the preanxiety.
It's a really good term. And
Trying
so
to coin
obviously
that one. No,
you should,
just
I
kidding.
know, right? I feel like that might be a really good course. How to get rid of anxiety,
Overcoming. Yeah.
overcoming anxiety. Exactly. There you go.
Love it.
So, coming back to your discovery of the fertility awareness method, and how that empowered you to overcome your anxiety, can we talk about that a little bit? Because you obviously mentioned like your whole 20s was just like to me it's sort of like dominated, I guess, your that decade of your life. And I think you discovered fertility awareness like in your late 20s, I believe. Can you talk a little bit about like how that shifted? Like what was a light bulb aha moment for you?
Yeah, so I was 29 when I discovered fertility awareness on a random Google search. And, I'd just gotten into a new relationship and I saw natural birth control. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of interesting because I had gone off the pill years ago because, like I said, I got sick from it. Just been a condom girly. But I'm thinking, okay, natural birth control, that sounds super interesting. So I hired a fertility awareness educator, which is what I am now, and got her to teach me how to chart my cycle and how to know the exact days when I'm in my fertile wave and then when I'm infertile and how to see when I'm ovulating. And so learning that to me was just a huge it was just a huge that light bulb moment that you mentioned of realizing, okay, my cycle happens in, this way. My ovulation happens in a relatively predictable manner, and I can track it and know what's going on, and I can make these decisions about my fertility. And so that's the part that I found really empowering is that kind of autonomy and control in a sense of how am I going to control my fertility and what decisions and behaviors am I choosing to make based on where I am at in my cycle. And it just felt like, yeah, that's part of my life that I felt so out of control and out of my hands and something I didn't really understand. And it just happens. I understood how it worked. And that just gave me, it was like a breath of relief in a way. Okay, now I see how it happens. And it just gave me a context for like realizing it's not, that easy to get pregnant, actually. It
Yeah.
can be, it can happen on a fluke. It did for me, but it can also be not like that. And just understanding the like both and of it all. And yeah, for me, just that sense of being able to make those decisions for myself and take back that sense of control is what really helped me move through and heal part of that trauma that happened to me all those years ago. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so with that said, how long do you feel like it took you to feel comfortable? Because I hear this
Mhm.
often too, from women. They say something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm just so terrified to take this IUD out or to come off of the pill or whatever, insert whichever birth control option they're using." So I'm curious about that. And if you have any advice for someone who is considering doing this too, what are the steps? Like how long does it take? And,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's really personal, and that's what I love about the fertility awareness method is you can make this practice your very own. It's you once you know the knowledge of your cycle and how it works, then you get to make the decisions of how you want to use it and what that looks like. And so I'll explain a little bit more about what that means in a bit, but yeah, for myself, I took it super slow. Like I don't think I so for me, yeah, because of like just my past and where I was at, and I was in a different relationship than I am now at the time when I was learning. Turns out he, wasn't my forever person. And so I think I was a little more cautious with him as well because I knew like maybe deep down that that was the case. Um, but yeah, for me, it was just like getting really comfortable with the practice. And then once I knew that I'd ovulated and I was in my luteal phase after that, so infertile again until my next before my next period, basically. Um, that's when I felt more comfortable to sort of slowly start taking more risks. So maybe trying a bit of withdrawal there. And yeah, taking it really slow. That's how I did it because, and then, yeah, with the follicular phase, it's a little bit more risky. So you don't know when you're going to start your fertile wave, but there are rules that you can follow to prevent pregnancy within that time. And it just depends really where you're at on the pregnancy acceptability scale. So, this is a big thing that I teach clients about. And maybe you've talked about it on the podcast before, but the pregnancy acceptability scale is just a scale from 0 to 10. And 0 being, I don't want to be pregnant right now at all, cannot do it, no way. And 10 is, I want to be pregnant like yesterday. And so 5 is, somewhere in the middle of that. And then you can kind of fit yourself anywhere on the range. And so if you're someone who's a 0, you're going to make different decisions for yourself than someone who's a 4, who might be a little more open to the potential of a pregnancy, but still trying to prevent. So there's different practices and decisions you might incorporate at different times based on your risk willingness or pregnancy acceptability level. And so that's again where that autonomy comes in, is placing yourself on the scale and really owning that number. And it can change, but owning where you're at as sort of a barometer for the different practices that you're going to incorporate inside of your fertility awareness practice. So yeah, it's really personal. I always, when I work with clients, I always say 3 months at least to get really comfortable with the practice and start to really understand your own pattern in your body. But for people that have more of an anxiety about choosing it and about pregnancy, it could be longer, and it's okay. Take your time and do it your way. That's how I believe it should be.
Yeah, this is amazing. I actually have never heard that term before. So I'm glad
Okay.
you mentioned it. No, I don't think I have. Maybe I might have a long time ago or something and I forgot. But I think that that is such a great way to start it, because when you think about generally how birth control is prescribed, or the experience of using different birth controls, whether it's the pill or an IUD or the depot shot or whatever, there really is such a lack of informed consent, as we well know, in the
Yes.
process, right? Of getting to the point where you're going to get an IUD or whatever. I mean, we see these videos now that are coming out of women having an IUD inserted, and the pain is so excruciating that, some of them are passing out, they're throwing up, and all of these things are happening, and they had absolutely no idea. And they're just told it might be like a pinch. And so I think that that is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to informed consent. So I love that you shared this, because like you say, it just creates this feeling of confidence and an empowerment in a way that uh, I just think that so many women have not experienced. And I think it really just helps dispel a lot of their fears around using fem for birth control.
Yeah, yeah, make it your own. And that's why I created the holistic birth control plan as a part of my programs with clients. So they have, it's sort of like a little wheel, and it shows the different phases of the cycle and the fertile phase, the leading up to the fertile phase, menstruation, and then the post fertile time when it's infertile. And so it's like, what are you going to choose in each box or each section of your cycle? Which practices are you going to choose for your practice? So sometimes you might want to incorporate condoms when you're leading up to your ovulation. During your fertile wave, you definitely want to do something. You're not going to have unprotected intercourse. So figuring out what are the practices you'll incorporate during your fertile wave, and then in your infertile time, figuring out what works for you. You could have unprotected intercourse, but if you're not comfortable with that yet and you just want to try some withdrawal and get used to the practice, that's also fine. Like being still having the practice is still so empowering.
Yeah, it is. And I think this is incredibly helpful, because society so often tells these women that natural methods aren't reliable. And so I
Right.
think that that's like a big hurdle to overcome as a fertility awareness educator.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I also try to be really upfront with clients as well. And, let them make the best decision for them, and let them know, okay, so there's not enough studies on the fertility awareness method. The ones that we do have, though, show that it's really quite effective, can be up to 99.4% effective. But I wish there was more studies. And there's all the women's experiences, the lived experiences of the people who practice it, who have been using it for birth control for all these years. So remembering, like, science is important, but it's not the only way to measure something and make a decision about something. So, it's personal choice on how you want to approach that, but taking those both into account. And again, like you said, having that informed choice to choose this birth control, knowing all the facts, as opposed to, yeah, like you said, when we just kind of put on the pill and given it and not really told, oh, you might have these side effects and things like that. So I
Yeah.
always try to be really real, so that if they come in with all the knowledge of pros and cons of fertility awareness, then they know they're choosing it with all of that in mind. And that's, again, the empowerment of it all, right?
Oh, totally, totally. I was just thinking as you were talking, and talking through like how you walk people through this. Can you talk a little bit more about the practical side of cycle tracking and fertility awareness? Maybe just speak a little bit
Yeah.
about what it entails and how it works and how it allows women to feel fully in control of their reproductive health without relying on the hormonal birth control and, feeling fearful every month.
Yeah, absolutely. So the method that I teach is the symptothermal method. So we track two main symptoms of our cycle, which is cervical fluid and basal body temperature. And essentially, when you track those two things together, you can see when you're fertile, which is when you're having cervical fluid. You know you're in your fertile wave because sperm needs cervical fluid to survive. They need that alkaline environment and they kind of like eat, I guess, the sugars that are in the cervical fluid. So sperm can survive in cervical fluid for up to 5 days. So it's important to know some certain anatomy and physiology facts as a part of the practice. But yeah, you'll be able to track that you're in your fertile wave through your cervical fluid, and then your basal body temperature, it stays lower in the lead up to ovulation. And then once you ovulate, it rises. So you'll notice a temperature shift from lower pre ovulation to higher post ovulation. At the same time as the temp rise, your cervical fluid dries up. So those two signs together, you can cross-reference them to know you have indeed ovulated. There's a few rules that you have to follow to make sure that you actually did ovulate. And that's something I teach in my programs. But once you've done that, you know you're actually infertile until you start the cycle again. So it's
Right.
just about knowing the facts of each different phase of your cycle, and when it's more likely to conceive versus actually impossible to conceive. So, yeah.
Yeah. I know it's actually so much more simple, ladies, than you might have thought. And I think that there's a common objection, and it's, oh, Nicole, I can't do all of that. You can't be seriously asking me to do all of that. And I think that that comes from uh, multiple generations now of women taking a pill every day to just,
Mm,
address their fertility. And that's it. Right. And so it's a very easy, somewhat quick fix, although one that has
mm.
multiple potential short and long term side effects, as we well know. And so I'm curious how you combat that objection around, wait, Torey, you want me to do what? Because I feel like
Yeah,
that definitely comes up.
it does. And it's so funny because for me, I took the pill for probably 5 years. And I found that way more
Same.
difficult than fertility awareness, but that's probably because maybe intuitively I knew it wasn't good for me because I was experiencing some sickness. But yeah, for me, I think it was just so much fun to track my fertility and see what was going on with my body in a way that I'd never even conceived of before. Haha, pun intended. But
Good one.
no pun intended. um, no, but yeah, I just found it so much more fun. But for those people that maybe have some reservations about it, like just letting them know it's really actually not that involved. Like I would say it takes more time in the beginning to get integrated and make it more of a habit. But once it's a practice that you do like every day, it's like riding a bike. It's just part of your life. You just brush your teeth, you check your cervical fluid, it's like self-care. So I really find that, yeah, once you get into the habit, it's not such a big deal. It is a bit of learning up front, but if you're up for it, it's super fun. Like the first time you confirm your ovulation, like that is so much fun. And
It is.
I just say, like, yeah, if you're up for it, you'll enjoy it.
I could not agree with you more. I know it's true. That first time, I think that, like you said, right? It's a matter of bringing joy and pleasure back into the conversation around reproductive health, and moving away from the scared, ashamed teenager or 20 something that you were or we were. And there's something
Yeah.
just incredible about that. Um, is there anything else that you want to share about the fertility awareness method that maybe people might not know, or some kind of like nugget that might help someone make a decision to try using it, and or like working with someone like you to help them?
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where I personally found working with somebody just to be so helpful because I had so many things to work through on a personal level, but also yeah, just wanting a little bit of insight on my own chart and what was going on and am I doing this right? That reassurance when you're first starting out is so important, at least if you're somebody like me who enjoys that reassurance. And yeah, I just found working with somebody to be so beneficial in that way. And that's why I love working with clients and, giving them the option to just email me whenever, ask me your questions, send me your solicited cervical mucus pics, like we're talking about it all. And so giving them, yeah, helping them through the practice at the beginning and really, yeah, getting them to feel confident, giving them reassurance. That's the kind of thing that I love offering to people so that they have somebody to kind of help hold their hand when they're first starting out. Cause it can be a big change and a bit scary. And yeah,
Yeah, terrifying. I mean, coming off the pill for me was terrifying. I was like, what am I doing? This is crazy. But that it wasn't
yeah,
more crazy than ending up in the ER having an allergic reaction to the UTI medication that I was on every couple of months because I was on the pill. So at some point I think you make a decision almost that you're
yeah,
going to try something different. And for me, and I imagine for you and so many listening, that the decision to try the fertility awareness method or some form of a fertility awareness method uh, is just, one that, first of all, it's a method that respects the body's natural processes rather than manipulating them. And it actually is a science-based method for pregnancy prevention and for conception.
yeah.
And I just, I think about those benefits, and I'm curious from you, actually, one last question about the benefits. Like, obviously, yes, it's amazing. We understand our fertility. We understand when we can get pregnant, when not. Um, and that's great if that's, one of those things are our goal. But I know that there are a lot of other amazing benefits to having this knowledge. Can you talk about that? Like, really, when you understand your cervical fluid patterns, or you can see variations in your temperatures.
Definitely. So, yeah, it's a window into your overall health, really. The menstrual cycle and your chart can show you so much. It's amazing. And so, there's that benefit of having a window into what's going on with you. If maybe you're experiencing some symptoms or something's off, having the chart as another piece of data to kind of correlate with that and really dig deeper into what the root cause of the symptoms might be, that's a huge benefit of it. And yeah, in that way, charting is like a self-care practice because when you are able to tune into what's going on in your cycle and you have that relationship with your body in that way and something starts to go off, it's a little clue that, okay, what's going on here? Is there something that I changed in my diet or my lifestyle that maybe isn't working? Or is there, something deeper? And so, yeah, it's like, it's all about self care and especially like knowing the phases of the cycle and how you feel at the different phases. And a lot of women aren't even aware sometimes of how much we change emotionally throughout the cycle, not to mention physically as well. And so being able to know exactly where you are in your cycle and how best to take care of yourself in each phase and even to how to schedule your life around your cycle is super empowering. Doing things that would be more outgoing and front facing when you're ovulating and you're feeling that fertile, like go get it energy versus menstruating and it's a bit more of a quiet, restful time. So really learning to honor that and honor those rhythms, I find that to be a super empowering practice. And I partially attribute it to why I was able to overcome very severe menstrual cramps. There's a few other things I did too with my diet and lifestyle, but just having that awareness of my cycle, I swear it had some sort of, maybe it's like a spiritual effect on the pain I was experiencing. So yeah, you can go as deep or as surface level as you want into that kind of stuff, but some women really enjoy kind of digging into almost the spiritual aspects of their cycle as well.
Yeah, this is so good. And I think that there's really something to be said for just being able to slow down and calm your nervous system when it needs to be calmed. And that, of course, has an impact on pain signals in your body. So it makes so much sense to me. And then to build on that, I think about the perimenopause window and how sort of I don't know, disorienting it can be. I'm turning 45 this month and I'm like, what the hell? What's happened? And, and so cycles have definitely started to change. And I feel like being grounded in that cyclical awareness and living still according to these phases, although they're a little wonkier now, but I find is so incredibly grounding. And I wish all women in perimenopause would do this too, because having that practice from when you're in your 20s and 30s, and carrying that through your 40s as things start to wind down is, to me, tremendously helpful. I would be literally losing my mind if I didn't have this. And so I just want to add that on
Yeah,
for anyone who's listening.
definitely. I love that. I think it should be something for all ages of the cycle, of the life cycle, right? Like perimenopause, absolutely. And then, yeah, bringing it back to the teens and the preteens, like maybe not for birth control for everyone over in that age group, but just the cycle awareness and being aware of your phases and your moods and why, and not, yeah, trying to fight it so much.
I
Being
could
able
not
to live
agree.
more in rhythm with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, for sure. I could not agree with you more. And I just have loved this conversation. I think it's so, so good and touches on so many critical components of women's health, starting from when we're really young all the way through perimenopause and into menopause, honestly. And I really appreciate it. And I would love for you to just share with everyone where they can find your work and what you're up to in the world.
oh, thank you. So my business is called Honeypot Health. You can find me on my website. It's honeypothealth.ca. And I also have an Instagram that's honeypothealth.ca. I have a TikTok that's Honeypot Health and a YouTube as well that I think you're going to link in the show notes. And I'll just say for anybody that's curious about natural birth control, if they want to take a quiz to kind of find out if it might be the right fit for them for their birth control, I do have a quiz that I believe you're going to also link into the show notes. So go ahead and take that quiz. It's fun and lighthearted, but it'll give you a little sense of whether fertility awareness might be right for you. And besides that, I think that completes me. But yeah, I
Amazing.
offer one-on-one programs and group courses as well. So if you're interested in learning fertility awareness for birth control, I'd love to work with you.
That's incredible. I love the quiz. I think that that makes a lot of sense because not all of us are ready for this. And I just appreciate your work in the world, helping women feel more empowered and more safe in their bodies. I think that this is truly incredible work and it's life-changing work. So I appreciate you so much, Tori. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate you and love what you're doing with this podcast and all of your amazing work. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's a wrap. Be sure to click that subscribe button to join me for more Girl Talk on Menstrual in upcoming episodes. But in the meantime, check out my latest Period Party episode. And if you're looking for a deeper dive into your hormones, go ahead and take my period quiz at nicolejardim.com/quiz.